know what? Things are vibrating. My watch just went off. Hey, it says we're live. I guess we're live. Hey, Karen, how you doing? Karen. Karen's on behind. Hey, Robin, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Sean?
I'm doing all right. You know, it's great when we go live and I lead with using the wrong name. Nothing like the magic of live internet. This is
That's
live
okay. That's
broadcasting.
okay.
Uh, for those who don't know, Robin is with the Traffic Injury Research Foundation, and you've been on a whole bunch of episodes of different things.
Yep.
So we are excited to be doing a new segment, and this is TIRF. It's TIRF tips. TIRF tips,
Tips
and
with
and
Toronto
and
Police Service,
yeah, well,
right?
it's that play on how Chips does the logo with the big C and the little. So we're have some fun, and for those who know what Chips is, you know, and if you don't, well, then you don't. You need to Google it. But yeah, hit the QR code on the screen. Well, I guess scan the QR code on the screen if you'd like to be taken to a wonderful piece of information on their blog. And what is that document?
So today we're talking about winter driving, and we're talking about speed and kind of how those two work together to get us home safely at the end of the day.
So this ties back to a couple of posts that I've made recently, and I've been using the really awesome technology, which is ChatGPT, an AI source of information, or I don't even know how to describe it. It's basically Google with a mind of its own. How do we describe
A
that?
little bit frightening, a little bit
The,
frightening,
the,
but
the little bit
very,
frightening. I
very
love it.
accurate. I
I
was
love it.
I was following your tips and kind of what the top things that ChatGPT put out, and yeah, the top road safety tips coming out of there. So clearly, yeah, it does a lot of thinking,
Yeah,
which is good.
I basically asked it to provide me with a bunch of traffic safety suggestions, tips that I could share with the general public. And I want to know, like who's better, who's got the best stuff. And of course, I'm going to release those slowly over time. But if you jumped out and confirmed, well, it's good advice. There's nothing that we shared that wasn't that wasn't right
Yeah,
on the money. The first one being, I believe it was wear your seatbelt.
seatbelts, seatbelts.
And you were, as soon as I tagged you, you were right on it with some stats. So seatbelts. I mean, I still have to remind people on a regular basis that seatbelts are a thing.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, I think there's a bit of a misperception because vehicles have changed a lot, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years. And there are so many driver assistance systems put in there that we feel safer. And that's important when we buy a vehicle. Safety is one of our top purchasing decisions. But your seatbelt next to your brain is still one of the most important safety features. And over the span of a decade, it saved like over 11,000 lives. Those are 11,000 people who got home to their families, to their friends safely. So irrespective of how safe your vehicle is, you want to stay in your vehicle in a collision, and your seatbelt keeps you there,
That's
and
huge.
where you're protected.
Yeah, there's a misconception that airbags are like an if or option. Like you don't have to use it because the airbag's there to save you. But the airbag only works if you're positioned exactly in the right place when it comes time for a collision to occur, and at that bag to deploy at 200 miles per hour.
Yeah.
If you're not where you're supposed to be, it doesn't work the way it was designed to.
Right, and your seatbelt actually protects you as it deploys, because if you're not belted in, then you're going your speed into the airbag, which is coming at you at a much faster speed, so you can actually be injured. So you really need to have your seatbelt on to make sure your airbag works properly.
I've heard that some vehicles, some modern vehicles, change the deployment rate based on whether the seatbelt is activated or being worn
Yeah.
or not. So a lot of things change if you're not wearing it. But I don't know how anybody drives with the bing 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 in their ear, and I know people who do. Not to
Yeah.
call out my father.
Yes, but our seatbelts keep us safe, right? And we've done a great job improving seatbelt usage rates, particularly for front seat passengers. And often those in the back seat think it's not that important. They think they have the seat in front of them to protect them. But what they don't realize is that they actually become a projectile in the vehicle because they're not belted in. Same with your book bag, same with your pet. Anything that's not belted in becomes a
Yeah.
projectile and can kill other occupants in the vehicle.
I recently had a conversation with a good friend of mine, very good friend of mine, and they basically said, when I was a kid, we didn't have to wear seatbelts, or nobody really cared, or I was in a car collision where the vehicle was rear-ended and I was sleeping in the back seat and I rolled forward. It was no big deal. I think there's a lot of luck that came into them surviving and getting to this ripe old age of what we are now, or what I am and he is.
Yeah, there are really two important myths actually with seatbelts. People often don't wear their seatbelt because they think they're making a quick trip. I'm just going to the corner store. I'm just going to the neighbor's house. I'm just going somewhere short distance in my neighborhood, low speed. And yet those are when collisions are most likely to occur. And then other people don't wear their seatbelt because they have a fear of being trapped in the vehicle. And it's like, in the vehicle is the safest place you can be, because when you're ejected from the vehicle, you hit trees, roads, other vehicles, utility poles. There's all kinds of hard surfaces which can kill you. So keeping in the vehicle where you have the crumple zone to protect you, you have airbags to protect you, that's the safest place to be. So you really don't want to be ejected in a crash.
Ejection bad. Yeah, and also normal or new vehicles crumple in a totally different way. They're designed to basically fold up and protect the passenger compartment, but that doesn't mean that you want to be anywhere but where the designers put you.
Yeah, want you to be seated and belted in.
Let's see, we got a whole bunch of people. We are currently live, and I'm just looking through some of the chat comments. Let's see here. So John, who is, I'm assuming, watching from Ireland, says you get points on your license for not wearing your belt in Ireland. And that's good. It's the same thing here. There's points on your license. And if it's children that are not wearing their seatbelts, people under the age of 16 under the age of 16, the driver gets those points.
Yep.
Let's see here. Somebody wants to know they want to know what a penal law is. Okay, that's not related to what we're discussing here. You will need to hit the sensor if your airbags will not deploy. Oh, yeah. So airbags deploy based on certain triggers. Not every collision will result in a deployment of the airbags. I was in a T-bone situation where I struck a vehicle that pulled out in front of me, and I was really shocked that the airbags didn't deploy.
Yeah.
And let's see here. Zeri doesn't think we do anything. That's okay. Evbot says that they tell their passengers to get buckled or get knuckled. So that's a very aggressive way to ensure seatbelts are being worn. Yep. Maybe not a good idea. Maybe just don't drive unless everyone's buckled. And if they don't want to buckle, then they don't ride with you. That's a solution. Okay. So we're talking right now to Robin Robinson from TIRF, and I'm just reading the chat. So I'm giving you a spiel while I read. And this is going to be a edited down to a very quick update, but we wanted to give you the opportunity of chatting with us while we're doing it. Maybe you bring up some really cool stuff. So this is an interactive opportunity, even though it's going to be edited down for final deployment. What do we have here?
And a big one for seatbelt, Sean, are pets. You definitely need to have your pet in a seatbelt. So my husband and I basically recently got a dog, a Husky Shepherd. He's a big dog. He weighs about 60 pounds. And one of the first things we bought for him was a seatbelt to make sure that he's safe and secure in the back seat. And in a collision situation, he doesn't leave the vehicle, and he certainly doesn't fly forward and injure us as well. So
many people
for your pets even.
So many people just don't want to, they don't want to tell their kids things that make them unhappy. They don't want to make their dogs unhappy by putting them in the back and tethering them or crating them, even though it's the best thing for them. Yep. So what many drivers don't realize is it's also against the law to have their dog in their lap, which really changes things to a new level of not safe. But, being that you care for that pet, and you want to keep them safe, back is best, back seat is best. And for kids too, we say back seat till 14 years old. So that's the ideal location. And of course, wearing the appropriate stuff. You wouldn't want your child to be without a seatbelt. Why would you take your dog and put them into a situation where they could be launched out of the vehicle and either injure you in the process of being launched, or of course, become injured themselves, even if they're not injured in the initial collision, become free to roam the highway after a horrible crash. They may be killed after the fact.
Yep.
Okay. Uh, Karen is the Karen that I mentioned earlier sent a message saying, you know what, we should mention that pickup drivers who put their dogs in the back that open bed, that's obviously not safe and not legal to transport an unsecure or insecure load, but it's
Yeah.
just not safe.
Yeah. Well, and particularly on winter roads, right? When you think about the whole issue, so one of the things we want to talk about was the whole issue of speed and winter driving and winter tires. And when you don't have winter tires on your vehicle, it's much harder to avoid a collision, right? So all the more reason to have the seat belts, have people belted in, have pets belted in, and have loads well secured, because it can be really dangerous.
I want to pull up the tweets that we were talking about. So we had, I think we're on tip number 6 now. So we talked about seatbelts, and then you just mentioned speed, and I think that was tip number 2, wasn't it? No, it was distracted driving. Speed was the third one.
Yeah.
No, it was drinking and driving was the third one. Where's speed? Isn't speed one of them?
Speed was second. Speed was second. Drinking and driving was third. Distraction was fourth, or vice versa. ChatGPT was great because it got the fatal 4. The top 4 tips were the top 4 contributing factors in road crashes: seatbelts, speed, alcohol or drugs, and distraction.
Well, we still see, unfortunately, people who choose to make the decision to get behind the wheel of a motor vehicle or a conveyance and operate it while under the influence of drugs or alcohol. I don't understand how this is still a thing, but it is still a thing. So we know that people can be distracted and impaired well before the legal limits, and yet people are concerned in our live stream this morning. You know, how many drinks can I have before it's not legal? That's the least of your concerns. It's the cause.
Well, and that's the misnomer, right? Like that's the misperception, is people thinking they can drink up to a limit, but there are so many factors that affect you. For example, how much you've slept, or how fatigued you are, how much you've eaten. So what it is today versus 3 weeks from now could be different. So the safest strategy is really, if you're driving, don't drink. If you're drinking, don't drive. Period. People are terrible at gauging their own level of impairment. And that's why they go ahead and drive. The number one reason you hear is, well, I felt okay. And it's like, well, you're impaired. How you feel, you're not a good judge of that. You probably feel better than you did previously when you were drinking and your alcohol level was higher. So you feel better than you did before, but that doesn't mean you're sober, safe to drive. It just means you don't feel as impaired as you might have earlier in the evening. So
you wouldn't want
never use your own judgment.
You would not want to take any medical advice from a doctor who was impaired, a lawyer who was impaired. Well, you don't want medical advice from your lawyer either, but you just don't go to your professionals and say, how many drinks have you had? Are you okay to give me, no. A driver judging their own abilities while impaired is just, it's
recipe
silly.
For disaster.
It's silly. So yeah, zero alcohol, zero drugs, best the thing. And in most major cities, I mean, certainly in Toronto, there are so many options that driving yourself is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
And if you don't care about hurting people, how about scratching your car? I mean, how do I appeal to people? People are still making this judgment call, and it's a bad one.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and the loss of license, right? The license suspension, that's probably the hardest thing, for particularly in a society that's car centric, and a lot of people need their vehicle to get to work if they don't have public transportation options. That license suspension, even for a low BAC offense, that can make your life really unmanageable.
Well, you start hitting them in the pocketbook, and then they just, some people say, well, I just won't pay insurance anymore. So, the people who are determined to break the law and simply don't care about other people, they're just doing it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how we can reach out to those people and how we can get them on board with the idea that people's lives are important. We see such tragedy when people who are, through no fault of their own, they weren't the ones drinking. They weren't the ones. They were out going, picking up their grandmother from the hospital or something.
Yeah.
They get hurt in the mix. Someone waiting for the bus, is horribly maimed or killed because someone was doing something stupid. So.
Yep.
This is, I keep putting up this scannable code. If you scan this, you'll be taken to a blog, and it's specifically talking about winter driving, right? That's what we're talking about in this particular link. And people think that the weather's gotten nicer it's fine. You can just start speeding up. You can start to, well, first of all, you're never allowed to legally go above this posted speed limit. I don't know why people believe that there's this permissible, range that it's okay. It's never okay to speed. And for good reason, because when you speed, you increase your odds of becoming involved in the collision and the severity of the damage and destruction. So that's part of it. But there's been an uptick this year. Since January, we've been monitoring. We see about a 30% increase in pedestrian collisions, not necessarily fatalities, but collisions involving pedestrians. And we've been, discussing what could be the cause of that. Is it something as simple as the warmer weather, the more people on the road, or are drivers just horrible?
Yeah, well, it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, certainly with the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, there's definitely more people interested in active transportation options in walking and cycling and scooters and two-wheeled vehicles. There's a whole range of new things out there on the road to make us slow down and pay attention even more so. But then people are just, we've seen an uptick in risk taking across the board, and it's still not well understood why that happens. But I imagine with all the pressures, people are either more distracted, more in a hurry under more pressure. But irrespective, every time you get out on the road, right, as a pedestrian or cyclist or driver, whatever, your life and everyone else's life out there with you is in your hands, and the speed is a concern, and particularly when we have winter road conditions, which in Canada have always been unpredictable and certainly seem to be more unpredictable in the last few years, where today it's bare roads and clear sunny skies and mildly cold, and the next day it's blowing snow, drifting snow. So to your point about speeding and speed limits, the objective is not always to drive to the speed limit, particularly if the road conditions are bad, and particularly in winter conditions, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's more slippery, there's more ice, there's fewer places to go. Like in terms of if you're going to leave the roadway, there's fewer places to get off the roadway safely or whatever. So
and two dry days in a row, and everyone forgets what happened the day before. It's suddenly we're at summertime driving, and we have to relearn what snow is when it falls again. It's a phenomenon that I haven't been able to explain. But you'd think we live here in Canada or in a snowy environment, at least in the winter, and we would learn some skills that stay with us. But it seems that every year we're once again dropped into this unknown fluffy stuff and have to figure it out.
Yeah, well, and particularly with winter, because it's a regular phenomenon and it sticks around, right? So I grew up in Northern Ontario, up north of the Sioux in Wawa. So we always had winter tires on our vehicle, and when you're driving Highway 17 in winter conditions, that can be a nerve-wracking drive. And I'm always somewhat surprised out on the road to see people who don't have winter tires. And just for clarification, right, it is winter tires. They're not snow tires. Snow tires is not the terminology that's correct. It is winter tires because it's about driving in winter, which tends to be, from end of October, early November through to April.
But one of the biggest differences in a winter tire is the compound used to allow it to maintain some flexibility when it's cold. Because if you take a summer tire on into the winter, it's like driving on a rock, and that's not safe because it doesn't bend. It doesn't have that same flexibility. Let's see here. Karen says that on the West Coast, Vancouver Island, winter happens and winter tires are needed. Well, it's 7 degrees. Under 7 degrees average temperature, winter tires are what you should be running on your vehicle for optimum safety. Now, some say there are tires that are all season. Well, all seasons are like most seasons. And then there's new tires being marketed as true all season, and they have an element of it. But that's like saying, would you like to have an all-in-one microwave toaster, like do everything? Swiss Army knife solutions do some things okay, but nothing as well as a true purpose-built item.
Right. So one of the important points in our infographic, Sean, actually, is that winter tires have better traction at minus 30 Celsius than all-season tires do at plus 4 Celsius. So when you're trying to stop, just because the road is bare doesn't mean it's the same, right? In much colder temperatures, you need that deeper tread, you need that flexible rubber in order to be able to stop safely. And essentially, when you choose not to put winter tires on your car, you are trading safety really for cost or inconvenience of purchasing winter tires and having them installed on your vehicle. So every time you're out on the road, you're really crossing your fingers, hoping that the weather's good and traffic isn't bad, which, isn't a certainty in Canada.
Well, some people just don't know how much of a benefit and how much of a different driving experience proper winter tires make, and it is a huge level of confidence and breath of relaxation that that you're actually gripping the road. It's a totally different experience. I never drove with winters when I was growing up. I always had all seasons, and I thought I was doing the right thing. And my wife opened my eyes to the concept of winter tires when we had kids, and I said, okay, fine, I'll invest, and I'll never go back. But 1017, who's a user on TikTok, we're currently live streaming there, says that's like $600. That's one paycheck, and says, so there's concern about money. And the concern about money is an interesting one because, yes, there is an initial expense of buying an additional set of tires and rims and so on. But what people don't think of is the fact that you have two sets of tires. You're dividing your ride time over two of them, so they last twice as long. And that you're essentially averaging out over time. But there is an expense, and I do understand that that's a concern.
Yeah, and for that reason, some governments have looked at subsidies to encourage the adoption of winter tires. And yes, I appreciate that cost is certainly an important one, particularly in today's economy. But on the balance of that is really, what's the cost of a collision? What's the cost to your insurance? What's the cost to the liability, right?
Well,
and it's
for money though, it's a life thing. It's a safety thing. If you could have had a different outcome to a collision, if you could have avoided the collision altogether for that $600 that they mentioned, in hindsight, I'm sure you would have paid it or doubled it.
Yeah. So essentially what you're doing is buying two sets of tires, but they're lasting you twice as long.
Right.
So I think it's about every 4 years, people replace their tires or should replace their tires, something like that. So you're essentially, yes, you have to buy two up front, and that is a cost, but that you are driving twice as long on them. And one of the concernings, which you probably see often on the road as well, Sean, is people who put two winter tires on their vehicle instead of four. And that actually can be really unsafe when it comes to collision, because the performance of your tires is very different, and that can affect a whole bunch of things on your vehicle, including how you stop and the effectiveness of your safety features.
And we talk to race car drivers, and we know some racers that we work with, and they talk about the fact that racing is just managing their tires. That the whole art of racing is less about hammering that gas. It's about managing their traction, managing their tires, and that's a science into itself. We can go on forever because we always do, and this is really meant to be a quick check-in and talk about some stuff and things. So I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me. TikTok is still chatting. We will edit this down and create some magic to then republish at a later date. But we'll sign off for now and do it again soon.
Okay, sounds good. Always fun chatting with you, Sean.
Any final goodbye words? Anything here? We'll put the logo up again with a link. So if anyone's interested in information, this is a winter driving blog post that this is linking to. So lots of great content here, and the TIRF website is just jam-packed full of amazing stuff. And you know what we didn't do? We didn't tell people what TIRF is.
Oh, Traffic Injury Research Foundation is an independent road safety research institute. So myself and many of my staff are researchers, and we study the behavior of people on the road.
I love it. And I love the stuff that you produce. I use your content constantly and educate people with the knowledge that you provide. So thank you very much. And we'll do this again soon.
Sounds good, Sean.
Awesome.